Zum weisen Einsiedler. Alle Wissenschaftler auf dem Nexus waren tot. Und mit ihrem Tod starb auch jede Hoffnung, den Kern in eine Superwaffe umzuwandeln. Aber einen Wissenschaftler gab es noch. Calaveras war der Skyripper-Experte. Aber hatte er auch die nötige Ausrüstung da oben in den Bergen? Wir werden es erfahren.
The core was killing him. He needed help. The sage Calaveras had given him the maps to find the armature and the core. If anyone knew the true name of the Transcendent Emperor, if anyone knew how to assemble the Skyripper, Calaveras did. If anyone could heal Reynardo and render the core safe, at least to its bearer, surely it was he.
Ich bin mir sicher, der Hase ist nicht begeistert von dem Plan.
The base of the mountain was the only safe place for a landing. He would have to continue on foot, muscles aching. Calaveras was a scholar, not a doctor. Could he really save Reynardo from the poison radiating from the lost god's eye he was so recklessly carrying?
Okay, so einen dicken Schaden sollte ich nicht nehmen, wenn ich...
Oh, this was not a fun way to die. Even if he survived. No one would write ballads about the fox whose knees ached forever, would they? Not unless he paid for it. And he hated paying for publicity.
Auch diesmal nehme ich hier die untere. Die blaue Tür hatten wir schon einmal. Ja, heil ihn ruhig, so oft bis mein Combo noch höher geht.
It was chilling walking through the living mountains. There was always noise up ahead. Insects, birds, the croak and flutter of ravens arranging ambushes. But close by, there was only the breeze and the trickle of melting snow. As if every living thing was holding its breath for his poisonous burden to move on.
Hilf mir, Doc!
wasn't sure he should have rescued Lapino. He could have had the Sky Ripper. Now all he had was the core, and it was killing him.
The core! Splendid!
Croaked Calaveras.
Where's the armature?
Right, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't need it.
No, I don't. It's just a professional interest. We've got much better prismatics than the old TE ever did.
So Calaveras was an arcane engineer. He fussed at the core all day. He wrapped it with silver chains, and in front of it, he placed a huge, round ruby, so that it looked like a monstrous, floating eye. Ah, so, what is it?
Yeah, I call it the Oculum. It's my very first death ray.
And it won't poison me?
Oh, no, it's completely safe now.
Anything I should watch out for?
Yeah, try to avoid pointing at any mirrors.
As he loaded the oculum onto the Farfarer, Bernardo was a little concerned about Calaveras. People who were utterly sure of themselves, he had found, were either experts or horribly wrong. Or both. But Bernardo only needed to fire the oculum once. He only needed to destroy one ship, the Emperor's ship, and the war was over. Bernardo plunged into the Imperial fleet. He felt the oculum humming. He no longer felt sick. This was going to be fun. Or at least, it was going to be over.
Ach ja.
Bernardo resisted the temptation to fire the oculum until the time came. He could sense its arcane energies yearning to escape the sage's wrappings. But it wasn't eating him alive. So that was a plus. He felt good about himself. He'd saved a friend, he'd helped the rebels, he'd relied on himself, but he'd listened to others. He felt like the right sort of hero. Wise, yet decisive. Calaveras had been so sure it would work. Maybe he could fire it just a few times. No harm in that, right? But only when he absolutely needed to.
Wende das Oculum auf den
Bernardo had
Imperator
been
an.
to a dungeon once where all the chests had teeth and eyes. It had been a short visit.
Oh. Was hast denn du gegen... Ah, wie heißen die? Imposter?
Bernardo's arm was getting tired. The core was no longer eating at him, but he still felt weak. His stamina was shot. But he had the oculum. When the ravens swarmed him, it would sometimes fire its death ray. It seemed to be warming up too, firing more and more often. Maybe he should let it cool off. He decided to stop using it entirely.
Ich habe das Ding noch kein einziges Mal abgefeuert. Was will das Spiel denn da von mir? Hätte ich einen anderen Weg nehmen sollen, dass es anfängt zu
Everybody
fließen.
wants to die, raise your weapon. All right.
Also gut, eure Krötigkeit. Wie hart wird Lapino mich diesmal abstechen? Entschuldigung.
odd.
Hi.
The oculum was still hot to the touch. He almost thought it was getting even hotter. Well, that was ridiculous,
Natürlich
of
wird das
course.
Ding explodieren.
Anyway, he'd only to fire it one more time, and then he could chuck the whole contraption into the abyss. And the Emperor's ship was now in range. Bernardo squinted. He could make out the line of ravens protecting the ship. Zenobia in front, conjuring. And on the deck, yes, that was his Imperial Majesty, pacing in his golden armor. Bernardo lined up his shot and fired. Caught in the beam, the ship burst into flames. The ravens and Zenobia exploded. The Emperor too exploded.
So did the
Bernardo
core.
waited for the beam to stop, but it only got brighter, and the oculum hotter. Frantic, Bernardo pulled the oculum towards the abyss. The ruby burst into flames. The shiny metal casing glowed, then melted. That was good. Now the core could cool off, right? Bernardo ran. The blast incinerated him instantly, along with both fleets. The shockwave could be felt across all Erda. That winter, with neither Empire nor rebels to rule them, the islands slid into banditry. And so began the Second Age of Darkness.
Okay.
He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new
Ja,
this
ich
time.
weiß, ich habe nichts Neues
He'd done the
gelernt.
same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.
Geschichte 18. Der Fuchs, dessen Knieschmerzen. Ein Held, der Ausgewogenheit sucht, der weise, doch wichtige Entscheidungen trifft. Ja, dann, ihr kennt das Spiel. Wir werden dasselbe nochmal tun, nur diesmal zur Rebellenbasis mit Latino und dem Kern gehen. Und da bin ich angekommen. Reynardo konnte den Kern zum Rebellenstützpunkt bringen. Die Ingenieure dort könnten vielleicht noch etwas ausrichten, und zwar bevor er dem Gift des Kerns erlag.
Ah, yes. The secret base. Not even Lapino knew where it was. They had engineers there. Those toads would surely know what to do with the core's power. And then he'd be free of it. But he couldn't take Lapino. The core would work its evil on him too. You stay here.
Give me the coordinates. I'll meet you there.
Lapino seemed awfully anxious to have the coordinates of the secret rebel base. Someone needs to bury these scientists.
Why do I get all the fun jobs?
And with that, Bernardo returned to the Farfarer and took off.
Okay, wir haben zumindest ihn zurückgelassen, aber ich bin mir sicher, der verfolgt uns irgendwie, weil er ein
The ruins
Arschlochhase
were
ist.
quiet, but Bernardo could hear a buzzing in his ears. Was it bugs? Or was it the core slowly feeding him poison? The Council would know what to do. If the core had this much power, it could surely change the terms of the great battle that was coming. And maybe they would take this burden from him. Maybe. Hypatia had been the first woman who'd ever tried to convince Reynardo he was smart. He knew he wasn't nearly as clever as he thought he was. But she'd pushed him to think things through. She had a vision of him that was better than his own. Bernardo thought of the choices he had made. He'd rescued a friend and left him behind. He'd recovered a weapon and it was killing him. And the Empire's greatest scientists were dead because he'd asked their advice. Bernardo for the win.
Definitiv.
How had it come to this? Renato had signed on as an adventurer. Sure, the Emperor had gone mad. Sure, Renato had heard horrors from the ghosts of dead kittens and puppies sacrificed in his blasphemous rituals. But when he jumped in, he'd only been a little bored and slightly broke. And here he was, carrying a bucket of death across a broken landscape. Why not drop it and run? Because he hated to quit in the middle. That was his fatal flaw. He had to know how it all turned out.
Okay, das ist interessant. Irgendwie ist der Weg komplett Banane, den wir hier gerade gehen.
The long stairs. So he was close to the rebel base. Nothing was on fire. So far, so good. Na gut, welch grausames Schicksal erwartet uns diesmal. He dropped the core at the entrance to the council chambers.
Get that thing out of here!
Croaked the speaker.
It's making us sick!
That's the core of the Sky Ripper, said Renato.
No, it's not useless at all.
Said an engineer toad.
It's poisonous. Look at the fox. He's ill. Probably dying.
Yeah, not useless at all, said Renato. So what do I do? Rub it on His Majesty? The engineer chuckled. Renato didn't like it when engineers chuckled.
Oh, I got it. Listen, I can make a bomb that spread bits of the core all over a circle about 100 paces wide. Yeah, little chunks of poison and death. All you have to do is just get it near the Emperor. It'll kill him and his bodyguard and chop off the head of the fleet. Yeah, and if we're lucky, might poison some of the ravens around there as well.
What about me?
Right, what about you? Well, I'll build in a timer. You can set it and run.
No, that's a horrible idea, said Renato.
Well, we have to do something, yes?
Said the speaker.
This is something.
Renato couldn't argue with that.
Ja, irgendwie hat er recht.
Reluctantly, Renato loaded the rigged core onto the Farfarer. and set sail towards the Emperor's ship. The rebels took the fight to the Imperial fleet, but Renato was too sick to enjoy the view. He must have passed out as a firm hand grabbed him and shoved him forward. This was it.
Das heißt, ich verliere auch hier Energie.
The fleet seemed very big, and its ravens very tough. Or maybe he was just slower and weaker than before. He hated the idea of poisoning the enemy. It wasn't fair. Face to face with a raven, let the best swordsman survive. But they wouldn't even know what was killing them. Feather by feather, scale by scale. He didn't mind dying a hero. That sometimes went with being a hero. But he didn't feel at all like a hero. Not today.
Wende die schmutzige Bombe auf den Imperator an.
He was exhausted. He was making stupid mistakes. His fur was coming off in bunches. Up ahead, he could see the Emperor's ship, long and sleek, a floating palace. The bomb would only poison a circle 100 paces wide. He would get as close as he could, shed it, and run. This was a lousy way to win a rebellion, he thought. He didn't want a medal for this. He just wanted to be forgotten. Renato twisted the timer on the bomb as far as it would go and staggered off. His knees hurt. Oh, everything hurt. He staggered away as far as he could until he had to lie down. He could see the entire Imperial fleet from here and the rebel ships engaged with it. There was a blinding flash. And a second later, a monstrous thump. Burning rocks arced across the sky over both fleets. A wreath of fire shot outwards, rolling across the fleets. A pillar of smoke boiled up from where the Emperor's ship had been. It reached into the clouds. That's a wee bit more than 100 paces, thought
Wir haben
Renato.
alles
It
vergiftet.
took Renato most of that evening to die. Some of the toughest ravens lasted all week. Some of the rebels in the furthest ships survived as much as a month. That winter, with neither Empire nor rebels to rule them, the islands slid into
Zweite dunkle
banditry.
Zeitalter.
And so began the second age of darkness. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.
Ein Held, also der Eimer des Todes. Ein Held, der seine Gegner zu einem langsamen und schmerzhaften Tod verdammt. Kein wirklicher Held. Na gut, dann an dieser Stelle wieder ein Cut, bis wir mit Lapino zum Rebellen oder Lapino den Kern geben. Genau, so rum war es und wir gehen selber zum Außenposten. Naja, auf jeden Fall. Mal kurz. Schnipp, schnipp. Und wir sind da. Wenn er sich darauf verlassen könnte, dass Lapino ihm den Kern beschaffen konnte, dann würde Reynardo stattdessen einen imperialen Außenposten angreifen und wertvolle Informationen für die Rebellion erhalten. So konnte er außerdem der ungesunden Aura des Kerns fernbleiben. Da als vergiftet den Hasen.
You won't regret this. I'll treat the core like it was my own baby daughter. As the Farfarer dived towards the Nexus, Lapino was jumping up and down with excitement. Stop rabbiting around, Reynardo said. Lapino just stared at him. The moment the ship landed, Lapino leapt off the ship.
Oh, bitte sag mir, Lapino stirbt einen grauenhaften Gifttod. Das wäre herrlich.
As Lapino vanished into the wilds of the Nexus, Reynardo vaguely remembered Lapino had a baby daughter, didn't he? And he told her mother he was going out to get some Easter eggs, and he'd never come back. But Reynardo was relieved not to carry the core anymore. He was already feeling better. And who knows, maybe this time Lapino would get it right. And if Reynardo could take the outpost, he'd have access to all the Empire's communications in this sector. Right?
Ich frage mich immer noch, ob ich irgendwann hinter diese Kanonen komme. Notfalls muss ich es irgendwann mal googeln. Also wir sind lila entlang gegangen. Na, ich bin falsch rumgelaufen, natürlich.
Reynardo caught his breath. His joints still hurt, but he couldn't feel the poison in his system anymore. He'd let the armature slip out of his hands to save his friend Lapino. Of course he had to let Lapino take the core. The rebellion needed every man doing his duty. And the rabbit would be no good taking on an Imperial outpost, right?
Ich habe keinen blassen, wie ich dahinter kommen soll.
Reynardo had rescued Lapino because he was an old friend. And then he'd sent him off with the poisonous core. And he'd probably bungled the mission too. What had he been thinking? That he'd have a romp in the Imperial outpost? Reynardo took the outpost with a song in his heart. Soon, he was stuffing his sack with key messages from and to the fleet. Then the Farspeaker Toad chortled a new message. The observatory had been sacked by ravens. Lapino and all the scientists had been taken to the mountains. Why? Why had he trusted Lapino again? And now the Empire had the core. Reynardo hailed the rebel base to warn them. But their Farspeaker didn't crouch back. Was the base under attack too?
Er musste Lapino retten. Mal wieder. Im Stützpunkt stimmte etwas nicht. Lapino den Kern anzuvertrauen war eine verrückte Idee gewesen. Jetzt waren beide in der Hand des Gegners. Vielleicht wollten die Imperialen, dass er seinen Freund zu retten versuchte, um ihn von der wahren Gefahr auf dem Rebellenstützpunkt abzulenken. Vielleicht sollte er Lapino seinem Schicksal überlassen und den Stützpunkt überprüfen, ohne nachzudenken.
Have to wait. The Corps would have to wait. Renato had a very bad feeling that something was going terribly wrong at the rebel base. Its location was secret, but secrets can be discovered.
Ohne nachzudenken werde ich hier hingehen.
There were Imperials everywhere in the ruins, and dead civilians. The Ravens were killing everything in sight. Renato was relieved to see no rebels among the dead. Maybe the secret base was still secret, but there were huge burn marks on buildings. What monstrous weapon was the Empire using here? The Corps had great power. Had they harnessed it somehow, even though they didn't have the armature? Renato thought about Hypatia's kid. Poor, dumb Peter.
Ach, Peter
Cut
ist der
down by a
Kleine.
goggler.
Ich hab's voll vergessen.
He wondered if Peter had known he was protecting the Book of Destinies. Or was he just another brave kid, making his mummy proud?
Ich glaube, er war einfach nur ein Trottel.
Renato had rescued Lapino and sacrificed the armature. He'd saved the one over the many. Then, he'd abandoned Lapino to save the rebel council, sacrificing one to save many. Oh, if I ever get out of this alive, he told himself, I'm gonna have a talk with me. He could smell charred flesh and hear screams. The ruins were on fire. The Ravens had rigged up the core as some kind of burning ray. They wouldn't need to know the secret location. They were burning everything. It was killing them too. Their black feathers littered the path. He would have to take the core from them. It was the last thing he wanted to do. The rebel base seemed quiet.
Ui, da
That was
brennt.
good. Also, it seemed to be burning. That wasn't so good. As the last Raven fell, Renato felt worse than he ever had. The core was killing him, again. The council members cautiously came out into the smoke. "You saved us," croaked the speaker. They would put the weaponized core deep in a cavern, she promised, where its poison could harm no one. They would heal him if they could, she said. No, he's a weapon now. We need one. I'll lead the charge. "It will kill you,"
Ach, nö.
croaked the speaker. "I guess it already has," Renato said. She bobbed her head gravely. "When all this is over," she said, "we'll name our new capital city for you." He flew towards the Imperial fleet, a myriad ships in disciplined formation, waiting for the signal to destroy the rebellion forever Behind him, the rebels were charging. If he failed, they would die. And so the final battle began.
Okay. Auch starten wir gleich auf dem Schiff, das wäre dürfte.
It was unpleasant to fight this way. With each blow he struck with his sword, he felt weaker. Yet each time the core fired, it got brighter. As if the heat from the burning ravens and buildings only fed its hunger. He wondered where Lupino was. Wasn't he supposed to be in the battle? No. He'd been captured, hadn't he? Oh,
Nein, ist einfach nur ein mieser Verräter.
Like the burning fleet. He hoped this wouldn't take long.
Das Ding wird einfach wieder in die Luft fliegen, oder nicht?
Precision, ferocity. Device was a wound. By the drink. Reynardo-opolis. Vulpus Major. Lando Nardo. If they were going to name a capital city after him, well, he just wished he had a better name. Where was Lupino? He missed Lupino's bitter outbursts. Or did he? Lupino had gotten him into this mess, hadn't he? The core was a wonderful weapon. It swept fire across the fleet. Ravens exploded in its gaze, and with every heartbeat it grew brighter. He would die. But he would die every inch a hero. Spectacularly, changing history like the legendary heroes of lore. Or was it Yor? No, he couldn't remember anymore.
Ihr werdet so sterben. Ich habe jetzt auch keine Lust hier während der Folge irgendwie stehen zu bleiben, deswegen werden wir uns dieses Ende ansehen, bevor wir sie beenden. Mwahaha.
Reynardo fell to his knees. The Emperor's bodyguards were lined up before his ship. Fierce ravens, all. And Zenobia. She was conjuring. He could not take another step. All he could do was fire the core. The ravens, Zenobia, the ship, all burst into flames, disintegrated, and blew away. So they had one, after all. The core grew brighter. He shielded his eyes, but he could still see it through his sleeves and through the flesh of his arm. And then he felt heat, as the fire grew to consume both fleets. And then he felt nothing. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time.
Ja,
He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.
Nein, habe ich nicht. Ich wollte einfach nur die untere Reihe fertig machen. Geschichte 20. Reynardopolis. Ein Held, der in Glanz und Gloria untergeht. So, damit haben wir hier unten alle Tode, die mit dem Kern zu tun haben. Wahrscheinlich. Jetzt bin ich mal gespannt, was so unser nächster Schritt wird. Ich denke mal... Hatten wir noch irgendwas? Ah ja, stimmt, wir müssen dann noch mal den Kern greifen und dann auf den Rettungsruf reagieren. Und dann sind wir mit Lapinos Seite fertig.